Deep in the Appalachian Mountains lies a place that locals know simply as the Blackwoods. Few dare venture there, and fewer still speak openly of the horrors that dwell within. The trees are thick, ancient things that twist and reach like skeletal fingers against the sky, shrouding the forest floor in darkness even on the brightest days. It was said that anyone who entered the Blackwoods at night was unlikely to return. But every now and then, some unlucky soul was tempted to defy the legend, and many never came back. This was a story that 12-year-old Tommy Ray knew well. His family had lived in Blackwood County for generations, and he had heard tales about the forest since he was old enough to walk. His grandfather, Old Joe, used to warn him about it, saying that something evil lingered in those trees. And he had seen the proof himself. One cold October evening, just days before Halloween, Tommy overheard his father, Daniel, arguing with his older sister, Lily. Lily, who had just turned 17, was all defiance and attitude. She rolled her eyes as her father spoke. "Lily, I don't want you going near those woods, you hear me?" Daniel's voice was firm, but it wavered with worry. "Dad, I'm not a little kid anymore." "It's just a bunch of trees," Lily scoffed. Tommy watched from the staircase, a sick feeling in his stomach. He knew Lily was planning to sneak into the Blackwoods with some friends as a Halloween dare. It was a tradition for local teens to venture just inside the woods, drink a beer or two, and tell ghost stories to see who would get scared first. But this year, something about it felt wrong. Later that night, when the house was dark and quiet, Tommy slipped out of bed. He crept down the stairs and into the kitchen, where he found his dad sitting alone, staring into a glass of whiskey. Tommy approached him cautiously. "Dad," he whispered. Daniel looked up, startled. "Tommy, what are you doing up?" Tommy hesitated. He had never seen his father look so troubled. "Do you think something bad will happen to Lily?" His father sighed deeply, glancing toward the darkened window. "Son, those woods aren't right. They've never been right. People talk about the ghosts, but it's not ghosts I'm worried about. It's the things that are still alive in there." "What things?" Tommy asked, his curiosity mixed with dread. His father's face went pale, and he didn't answer. Instead, he just whispered, "Get back to bed, Tommy. Don't you worry about Lily. I'll make sure she doesn't go near those woods." But the next morning, Lily was gone. Her bed was empty, her phone left on the nightstand, and her room was untouched. Daniel searched everywhere, frantically calling her friends and family, but no one knew where she was. The police were called, and soon the entire town was scouring the countryside, looking for any sign of her. Tommy felt a heavy weight in his chest, an overwhelming sense that he would never see his sister again. Days passed without a trace of Lily. Daniel grew more desperate, spending every night at the edge of the Blackwoods, calling her name into the darkness until his voice was hoarse. But the forest remained silent, as if swallowing his pleas whole. And then, on the 5th night after her disappearance, a strange noise filled the town, a low, mournful wail that echoed from the depths of the Blackwoods. It wasn't a human scream, but a chilling, otherworldly sound that raised the hairs on everyone's necks. Daniel knew it was time. He had no choice, he had to go into the Blackwoods. Tommy watched as his father gathered supplies, an old hunting rifle, a flashlight, and a rope. His face was set in a grim expression that made Tommy's stomach twist with fear. "Dad," he whispered, his voice small. "Please don't go. Please." Daniel knelt down and put a hand on Tommy's shoulder. "Son, I have to. Lily's in there somewhere. I can feel it. And I'm going to bring her back." He hugged Tommy tightly, then turned and walked out the door without another word. Tommy ran to the window and watched his father's figure disappear into the misty trees, his flashlight a small, wavering point of light swallowed by the darkness. Hours passed, and Tommy sat alone in the house, clutching an old quilt for warmth. The night stretched on, and outside, the forest loomed, its shadows seeming to press closer to the house. He tried to stay awake, to listen for any sign of his father's return, but exhaustion soon overtook him, and he drifted into a restless sleep. In his dreams, he saw Lily. She stood in a clearing, her face pale and her eyes wide with terror. Shadows twisted around her, and she reached out toward him, her mouth opening in a silent scream. Behind her, figures moved in the darkness, figures with long, spindly limbs and eyes that gleamed like molten gold. Tommy woke with a start, his heart pounding. The house was silent, but a strange feeling prickled at the back of his neck, a feeling that he was not alone. He got out of bed, his feet cold against the wooden floor, and tiptoed to the window. The forest was darker than ever, but in the distance, he saw something moving between the trees, a flicker of light, like a flashlight. "Dad," he whispered, hope flaring in his chest. He waited, watching the light move closer, weaving through the trees in an erratic, almost desperate path. As it drew nearer, he could see that it was indeed his father, his face drawn and haggard. But something was wrong. Daniel was stumbling, his steps unsteady, and his eyes were wild, as if he had seen things that no one should ever see. Tommy rushed to the door, flinging it open just as his father stumbled up the porch steps. "Dad," he cried, reaching out to steady him. Daniel grabbed Tommy's arm, his grip cold and trembling. "Tommy, get inside. Lock the doors. They're coming." "Who? Who's coming?" Daniel didn't answer. He pushed Tommy inside and slammed the door, locking it and dragging a heavy cabinet in front of it. His breath came in shallow gasps, and his eyes darted around the room, as if expecting something to break through the walls at any moment. "Dad, what happened? Where's Lily?" Daniel shook his head, his voice barely a whisper. I couldn't find her. She's one of them now." Tommy's heart sank. "One of what?" Daniel closed his eyes, and a haunted look settled over his face. "The Blackwood Takers. They're not human. They're ancient, things that shouldn't exist. I thought it was just a legend, a story, but I saw them." He began to sob, his shoulders shaking. "I tried to bring her back, but she's part of them now. And they're coming for me, for us." As he spoke, a heavy silence fell over the room, punctuated by soft, scraping sounds from outside the house. Tommy's heart raced as he looked at the window, where faint shadows moved in the darkness, closing in. "Get upstairs, Tommy," Daniel whispered, his face pale. "Now." Tommy didn't hesitate. He ran upstairs, his mind spinning with terror. He crouched in a corner of his room, his back pressed against the wall as he listened to the noises below, the thudding footsteps, the creak of wood, the soft murmur of voices that weren't quite human. Then, everything went silent. For a moment, he thought it was over, that maybe the creatures had left. But then he heard something, a low, whispering voice calling his name from outside the window. "Tommy." It was Lily's voice, soft and pleading. "Tommy, please, help me." He stood frozen, his heart pounding in his chest. He knew it couldn't be her. His father had said she was gone, that she was part of them now. But the voice, it sounded so real, so desperate. "Tommy," the voice grew louder, more insistent. Against every instinct, he crept toward the window and looked outside. There, standing beneath the trees, was Lily. Her face was pale and hollow, her eyes wide and empty, but her lips twisted into a pleading smile. "Tommy," she whispered, her voice hollow and distant. "Come outside. I need you." He backed away, his chest tight with fear, but something kept him rooted in place, unable to turn away from her gaze. Slowly, her face began to change. Her eyes darkened, her mouth stretched wider, revealing sharp, gleaming teeth. She reached out a hand toward him, her fingers twisting and elongating into claw-like talons. Tommy stumbled back, his throat tight with terror. He tried to scream, but no sound escaped his lips. "Come to us, Tommy," she hissed, her voice now layered with other voices, all whispering in unison. "Join us, be one of us." He scrambled to his bed, pulling the blankets over his head as he tried to block out the sound of the voices, the soft scratching at the window. But they didn't stop. They grew louder, filling his ears, his mind, until he thought he would go mad. And then, just as suddenly as they had begun, the voices fell silent. He lay there in the darkness, his heart pounding, his breath shallow. Slowly, he lowered the blanket, peeking out from beneath it. The room was empty, and the house was silent. But outside, beyond the window, he could still see the shadows waiting, watching, their eyes glinting with a hunger that would never fade. The Blackwoods had taken Lily. And now, Tommy knew, they were waiting to take him too.